December 17th, 1942. The North Atlantic. 52 degrees north, 35 degrees west. The temperature hovered just above freezing as HMS Belfast cut through the choppy gray waters, leading a convoy of 37 merchant vessels through what sailors had grimly come to call U-Boat Alley. Commander William Perry stood on the bridge, his binoculars scanning the horizon where the leaden sky met the darker sea. The weather forecast promised clear visibility, a death sentence for Allied shipping in these wolf-infested waters. He allowed himself a thin smile. For once, clear skies might work in their favor. The Germans believe their technological supremacy is unassailable, Perry thought, watching the merchant ships plowing through the waves in perfect formation behind him, each one shimmering with a strange, unnatural haziness. By this time tomorrow, Donit's U-boat captains will be questioning everything they thought they knew. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the story of how one British physicist's completely insane idea would transform the Battle of the Atlantic, save thousands of Allied lives, and force hardened German U-boat commanders to question whether they were hallucinating at sea, revealing how scientific innovation, not just firepower, helped turn the tide in the greatest naval campaign of World War II. Lieutenant Commander Geoffrey Haswell of the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve adjusted his spectacles and stared out across Liverpool's bustling dockyard. 20 years as a research physicist at Cambridge had not prepared him for the controlled chaos of a wartime port. 3 cargo ships were being fitted with what the dockworkers had started calling Haswell's hocus pocus, an elaborate system of lights, projectors, and specially formulated paints that defied conventional military wisdom. "They'll never approve full implementation," said Commander James Wilson, the skeptical naval liaison assigned to Haswell's project. "The Admiralty has already invested millions in ASTIC sonar systems. They want to detect U-boats, not play magician's tricks with light." Haswell didn't look away from the ships. "ASTIC is magnificent technology, but it's defensive. This is offensive, psychological warfare against the U-boat crews themselves." "Assuming it works at all," Wilson remarked dryly. "It worked in the tank tests and in coastal trials," Haswell replied. "But yes, the North Atlantic is a different beast entirely. 3,000 miles away, Captain Lieutenant Werner Hartenstein guided U-156 through the depths of the mid-Atlantic. His submarine was one of the feared Type IXE boats, 76.8 meters long, displacing 1,120 tons, armed with 6 torpedo tubes and 22 torpedoes. At 40 years old, Hartenstein was older than most U-boat commanders, with a distinguished naval career stretching back to the First World War. He'd already sunk 15 Allied vessels totaling 97,493 gross registered tons, statistics carefully tracked by the Kriegsmarine to measure success and award decorations. Hydrophone reports multiple propeller sounds bearing 070, called the sonar operator, Obermatt Carl Schmidt. Distance approximately 12 kilometers, and closing. "Excellent," Hartenstein replied. "Maintain depth at 30 meters. We'll let them come to us." The 48 men of U-150 SIXS crew moved with practiced efficiency. They'd been at sea for 31 days on this patrol, their 4th of the war. Their submarine represented the pinnacle of German engineering, a technological marvel capable of bringing Britain to its knees by strangling maritime supply lines. The Allies were losing ships faster than they could build them, with 1942 already seeing the sinking of 1,662 vessels totaling 7.8 million tons. Below deck, Chief Engineer Otto Hoffmann checked the twin diesel engines that powered the U-boat on the surface. Each manned M9V4046 engine produced 2,200 horsepower, allowing a maximum surface speed of 18.2 knots. When submerged, the submarine switched to electric motors powered by massive battery banks, reducing speed to 7.3 knots but providing silent running capability. The engineering spaces were cramped and hot, the air thick with the smell of diesel fuel, sweat, and machine oil. "How are the batteries?" Hoffmann asked his assistant, Maschinenmat Peter Kraus. "Charged to 96%, Herr Chief," Kraus replied, checking the gauges. "Oil pressure normal, cooling systems functioning within parameters. Hoffman nodded with satisfaction. In the confined space of a U-boat, the engineers were as crucial to survival as the torpedo men. A mechanical failure could doom the entire crew more surely than enemy depth charges. The Type IXE U-boats represented the culmination of German submarine design evolution since the Great War, larger and with greater range than the Type 7 boats that made up the bulk of the Kriegsmarine's underwater fleet. At 1,120 tons surface displacement, compared to the 769 tons of the Type VIC, the Type 9 boats could operate farther into the Atlantic, carrying 208 tons of diesel fuel that gave them a range of 13,450 nautical miles at 10 knot surface speed. Hydrophone confirms at least 20 ships, Schmidt reported. Probable convoy with escort vessels. Hartenstein allowed himself a small smile. Perfect. We'll surface after dark and make our attack from ahead of the convoy. Back in London, the Admiralty's submarine tracking room was a hive of activity. Here, the positions of all known U-boats were plotted on a massive chart covering an entire wall, with markers indicating their last known locations, probable courses, and projected positions. Women from the Women's Royal Naval Service, nicknamed Wrens, moved markers across the board as new intelligence arrived. The room itself was a marvel of information processing. Situated in the reinforced basement of the Admiralty building, it operated around the clock, processing intelligence from countless sources, wireless intercepts, convoy reports, aircraft sightings, and most valuable of all, decrypted German naval communications from the codebreakers at Bletchley Park. The ultra-intelligence derived from breaking the German Enigma codes had transformed the Battle of the Atlantic from a game of deadly chance to a coordinated chess match where the Allies could often see their opponents' moves in advance. The room hummed with quiet efficiency as 24 Wrens worked at various stations. Some manned telephones, taking reports from coastal stations and naval vessels. Others updated ledgers that recorded every known U-boat's movements, crew, and combat history. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of strong tea that kept the night shift alert. First Officer Elizabeth Montague had been working the night shift when the report came in about the experimental convoy. Her section had been tracking U-156 for 3 days, along with 4 other U-boats operating in the same sector. The convoy, designated on 153, was sailing directly into danger. Captain, convoy on 153 will be entering the estimated patrol area of at least 3 U-boats within the next 6 hours, she reported to Captain Arthur Benson, who oversaw the tracking room. Benson studied the chart grimly. They're aware. This convoy is carrying something special, some new countermeasure the Boffins have cooked up. Our job is to provide them with the most accurate U-boat positions we can. Montague raised an eyebrow. A new weapon, sir? Not exactly, Benson replied. Something about making ships invisible. Sounds like science fiction to me, but Coastal Command seems convinced it will work. At the Admiralty's Department of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, nicknamed the Department of Wild Talents by insiders, Dr. Thomas Wilkinson reviewed Haswell's calculations for the 5th time. The department had been responsible for numerous unconventional innovations, from Hedgehog anti-submarine mortars to airborne radar systems. But Haswell's Project Chimera was perhaps the strangest yet. The principle is simple, Wilkinson explained to Air Commodore Mansfield Cummings of Coastal Command. We're not trying to make ships truly invisible. We're exploiting how human vision and the brain process what we see. He pointed to a model ship on his desk, illuminated by a small projector. The human eye is drawn to contrast, the silhouette of a ship against the horizon. Haswell's system uses projected light in specific wavelengths and intensities to create what he calls a confusion field around the vessel. The model seemed to shimmer and distort, its edges becoming indistinct and difficult to focus on. The key insight came from Haswell's pre-war research on visual perception. Wilkinson continued. He discovered that the human brain uses specific environmental cues to establish position, distance, and movement. When those cues are deliberately manipulated, it creates a type of sensory conflict. He adjusted a dial, and the model ship's appearance changed subtly. We use precisely calculated patterns of light projected at varying intensities. The projectors are synchronized to create what appears to be movement or displacement where none exists. We've also developed special paints containing microscopic prismatic particles that refract light in unusual ways. Wilkinson pointed to a technical diagram on the wall. The system comprises four main components. The projectors themselves, which are modified naval searchlights with specialized filters and rotating prisms. The paint mixtures applied in specific patterns to key areas of the hull. Acoustic emitters that create underwater sound distortion. And a centralized control system that coordinates all elements based on environmental conditions. He picked up a small glass vial containing what looked like metallic dust. This is the prismatic compound. When suspended in paint and applied to vertical surfaces, it creates what we call boundary confusion. The visual edge of the object becomes impossible to precisely locate. When viewed through a periscope, especially at dawn or dusk when U-boats prefer to attack, the system creates the illusion that the ship is not where it appears to be, or that it's shifting position. The brain can't resolve the contradictory visual information. And this has been tested? Cummings asked skeptically. In controlled conditions, yes. We placed naval observers in conditions simulating periscope observations. Identification accuracy dropped from 96% to just 7% when the system was activated. Even when they knew what to look for, the effect was disorienting enough to prevent accurate targeting. Cummings frowned. And the cost? That's the beauty of it, Wilkinson replied with enthusiasm. It requires no exotic materials, no specialized manufacturing. We're using modified film projectors, theatrical lighting equipment, and special paint mixtures. The entire system costs less than a single depth charge run. In the North Atlantic, night had fallen on the Convoy. On the bridge of HMS Belfast, Commander Perry gave the order, activate the Chimera systems. Throughout the convoy, crews who had been specially trained for this mission sprang into action. On each ship, projectors mounted at strategic points came to life, casting carefully calibrated light patterns across the hulls and superstructures. Special paints applied in mathematically determined patterns began to interact with the projected light, creating a visual effect unlike anything seen before in naval warfare. From the bridge, Perry watched as the merchant ships behind him seemed to shimmer and distort, their outlines becoming fuzzy and indistinct. At certain angles, the vessels seemed to shift position slightly, or even appear to be in two places at once. Remarkable, whispered his first officer, Lieutenant James Cavendish. If I didn't know better, I'd swear I was hallucinating. That's exactly what we want the Germans to think, Perry replied. Haswell calls it cognitive dissonance, when what you see contradicts what you know should be there. The brain can't reconcile the difference. Beneath the waves, U-156 had maneuvered into an attack position ahead of the convoy's projected course. At 22:40 hours, Captain Lieutenant Hartenstein gave the order to surface. The diesel engines roared to life as the submarine broke through the dark surface. Hartenstein climbed quickly to the conning tower, where his watch officer, Oberleutnant Zur C. Friedrich Kintrat, was already scanning the horizon with binoculars. Convoy spotted. Hercule, Kintrat reported, using the abbreviated form of Captain Lieutenant. Bearing 195, distance approximately 4,000 meters. Hartenstein raised his own binoculars. In the darkness, he could make out the shapes of ships moving in formation, but something was wrong. The silhouettes seemed to waver, as though seen through heat rising from summer pavement. He blinked hard and looked again. What in God's name? He muttered. The ships seemed to shift position slightly when he moved his gaze, like optical illusions. He couldn't get a clear fix on their exact locations or courses. Kintrat, what do you see? He asked his officer. The younger man was frowning in concentration. The convoy is there, but I cannot establish exact positions. The ships appear to be flickering. It must be some atmospheric condition. Hartenstein wasn't convinced. Signal the bridge. I want a targeting solution for the lead merchant vessel. Below in the control room, the torpedo computer operator, Oberfähnrich Werner Ludde, received the order and began the complex calculations necessary for a successful torpedo attack. Speed, distance, angle on the bow, all variables that needed precise measurement. Hercule, Ludde called up through the hatch. I cannot obtain reliable targeting data. The rangefinder readings are inconsistent. Hartenstein swore under his breath. The convoy was right there, tons of valuable shipping ripe for the taking, but he couldn't get a proper fix for his torpedoes. Every time he thought he had a clear view of a target, the image seemed to shift or distort. Could it be a new type of smoke screen? Kintrat suggested. In these weather conditions? Impossible, Hartenstein replied. And there's no smoke. Whatever this is, it's something new. After 20 frustrating minutes of attempting to obtain a targeting solution, Hartenstein made a difficult decision. Dive the boat, he ordered. We'll try an underwater approach. As U-156 slipped beneath the waves again, Hartenstein hoped that whatever strange visual effect was protecting the convoy wouldn't affect his hydrophone operators. But he was wrong. Hydrophone contacts are confused, Herkelu, reported Schmidt, a puzzled expression on his face. I hear the propellers, but the directional information is contradictory. It's as if the sounds are coming from multiple locations simultaneously. What Hartenstein didn't know was that Haswell's system included underwater components as well, devices that generated specific sound patterns designed to create acoustic confusion, complementing the visual distortion effect. Aboard the convoy flagship, Commander Perry received the report from the ASTIC operator. Submarine detected, sir. Range 2,000 yards, bearing green 140. Moving erratically. They're confused, Perry said with satisfaction. Signal HMS Vanquisher to investigate, but hold fire unless the U-boat makes a hostile move. We want them to report this back to their headquarters. The escort destroyer peeled away from the convoy, its sonar pinging actively now that the German submarine had been detected. Hartenstein, hearing the distinctive pings of the destroyer's ASTIC, knew his advantage was lost. Dive to 150 meters, he ordered. Silent running. As U-156 slipped away into the depths, Hartenstein struggled to understand what he had witnessed. In his war diary that night, he wrote, encountered Allied convoy estimated at 25 to 30 ships with escort vessels. Unable to execute attack due to unprecedented visual distortion effect around vessels. Possible new Allied technology or atmospheric anomaly. Further investigation required. In London, the reports of the successful test reached Dr. Wilkinson's department with a mixture of jubilation and cautious optimism. Haswell's theory had proven correct in actual combat conditions. The Germans had been unable to execute an attack despite having the convoy in their sights. This changes everything, Wilkinson told Air Commodore Cummings. We need to implement this system fleet-wide immediately. Not so fast, Cummings cautioned. One successful test doesn't guarantee this will work consistently. And there's the question of resources. Can we really outfit the entire merchant fleet? We don't need to, Haswell interjected, having just arrived from Liverpool. The beauty of psychological warfare is that once the enemy knows some ships have this capability, they'll suspect all ships might have it. We only need to equip perhaps 20% of the fleet to create disproportionate uncertainty. In Berlin, the report from U-156 reached the headquarters of the Kriegsmarine's U-boat command. Gross Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of the submarine fleet, read Hartenstein's account with growing concern. Is there any precedent for this type of phenomenon? He asked Captain Zursi Eberhard Gott, his chief of operations. None, Herr Admiral, Gott replied. We've received 2 other reports of similar experiences in the past week. U-402 encountered what they described as ghostly vessels near Iceland, and U-517 reported targeting difficulties due to optical distortions off Newfoundland. Donitz frowned. The British must have developed some new countermeasure. Alert our scientific division immediately. The Admiral paced his office, hands clasped behind his back. The Naval High Command had assured Hitler that the U-boat campaign would bring Britain to her knees by cutting off vital supplies. In January 1942, following America's entry into the war, Operation Drumbeat had devastated shipping along the U.S. eastern seaboard. But the Americans had quickly adapted, implementing convoys and blackout regulations along coastal cities. Now, with British convoys potentially becoming more difficult to target, the strategic calculus might shift significantly. Donitz turned to his intelligence officer, Corvettin Captain Heinrich Müller. What do our agents in Britain report about new naval technologies? Nothing specific about visual countermeasures, Her Admiral, Mueller replied. Our focus has been on their ASTIC and radar developments. This appears to be something entirely unexpected. Unexpected, Donitz repeated quietly. The very worst kind of enemy development. He studied the map on his wall showing the current deployment of his U-boat fleet. Nearly 100 submarines were at sea, with another 120 in various stages of construction. Germany was building U-boats faster than ever before. 25 per month were now leaving the shipyards. But if they couldn't effectively target enemy shipping, those numbers meant nothing. I want a special scientific commission, Donitz decided. Bring in experts from the Naval Weapons Office, the Optical Institute in Berlin, and the Psychology Department at Heidelberg University. We need to understand what we're facing and develop countermeasures immediately. The Germans soon created a special research group within the Naval Weapons Office, designated Sonderkommando Licht, Special Command Light, tasked with understanding and countering the mysterious Allied technology. Meanwhile, the British expanded Project Chimera rapidly. By February 1943, over 200 merchant vessels and 45 Royal Navy ships had been equipped with the system. The results were dramatic. In convoy groups where at least a quarter of the ships used Haswell's technology, successful U-boat attacks decreased by 67%. On March 10, 1943, U-156 encountered another protected convoy in the mid-Atlantic. This time, Hartenstein was prepared, having been briefed on the new Allied technology now codenamed Phantom ships, by German intelligence. They're using projected light and possibly sound to create perceptual confusion, he told his officers. We'll approach from directly astern of a target vessel where the effect should be minimized. But the British had anticipated this adaptation. The new version of Haswell's system incorporated rear-facing projectors specifically designed to counter stern approaches, along with improved acoustic distortion devices. After another failed attack attempt, Hartenstein recorded in his log, "The British Phantom ship technology has been improved. Approach from all angles results in targeting impossibility. Recommend to command that attacks on convoys be suspended until countermeasures can be developed." Back in Britain, Haswell had become something of a celebrity within classified military circles, though his work remained strictly secret to the public. Prime Minister Winston Churchill, always fascinated by unconventional warfare, requested a private demonstration. On April 2, 1943, at a secure naval facility in Portsmouth, Haswell showed Churchill how the system worked using a small-scale model. "Most remarkable," Churchill commented, puffing on his cigar. "The Germans pride themselves on their technological superiority, yet here we are, defeating their U-boats with theatrical lighting tricks." "It's more than tricks, Prime Minister," Haswell explained. "It's applied neuroscience. We're exploiting specific weaknesses in human visual processing. The brain expects certain visual cues to remain consistent. When they don't, it creates profound disorientation." Churchill nodded. "How are the Germans responding?" "They're trying various countermeasures," Haswell replied. "Infrared scopes, polarized filters, even training their periscope operators to recognize and compensate for the effect. But none have proven effective so far. And can they duplicate it? Possibly, eventually. But it would require them to divert significant research resources away from their other weapons programs. And by then, we'll have moved on to the next iteration." Churchill seemed pleased. A perfect example of British ingenuity trumping German industrial might. "Carry on, Doctor. You may have saved more lives than any battalion of soldiers." By May 1943, the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic had decisively turned. U-boat losses mounted as improved Allied air coverage, better radar, and Haswell's confusion systems made successful attacks increasingly rare. In that month alone, 43 U-boats were sunk, nearly 25% of Germany's operational submarine fleet. Gross Admiral Donitz was forced to temporarily withdraw his U-boats from the North Atlantic, a decision that marked the effective end of the happy time, when German submarines had hunted Allied shipping with near impunity. The German scientific effort to counter Haswell's system produced limited results. They developed a specialized periscope filter designed to cut through the visual distortion, but it reduced overall visibility so dramatically that it created new targeting problems. By the time a more effective countermeasure was developed in early 1944, the strategic situation had changed so fundamentally that it made little difference. For Captain Lieutenant Hartenstein and U-156, the war would end before seeing the German countermeasures deployed. On March 8, 1944, after a distinguished career that eventually included 20 ships sunk, U-156 was caught on the surface by a U.S. Navy PBY Catalina aircraft east of Barbados. The aircraft dropped 4 depth charges in a perfect pattern. U-156 sank with all hands. In his last known letter to his wife, Hartenstein had written, "The war at sea has changed fundamentally. What once was a clear contest of steel and explosives has become something stranger, a battle of perception and psychology. The British Phantom ships have taught us that sometimes the most effective weapon is one that doesn't destroy the enemy, but simply makes it impossible for him to fight effectively." The full extent of Haswell's contribution to the Allied victory remained classified for decades after the war. It wasn't until 1972 that the technology, by then long obsolete, was declassified and Geoffrey Haswell, then 81 years old, received public recognition for his achievement. In a rare interview with the Imperial War Museum, the elderly physicist reflected on his wartime work. "What made it effective wasn't just the technology," he explained. "It was that we approached the problem from an entirely different angle. The Germans were thinking in terms of detection and destruction, sonar, radar, torpedoes. We thought about perception and cognition." "Did you ever meet any of the German submariners who encountered your system?" the interviewer asked. "Yes, at a naval history conference in 1965, Haswell replied. "A former U-boat commander approached me after learning who I was. He shook my hand and said, 'For 2 years, Herr Doctor, my crew and I thought we were going mad or that the North Atlantic was haunted. It is good to finally know it was just clever science.'" The technology Haswell pioneered didn't end with World War II. The principles behind his confusion system found applications in modern stealth technology, electronic countermeasures, and even in civilian applications like anti-theft systems and privacy screens. But perhaps its greatest legacy was in changing military thinking about the role of perception and psychology in warfare. As NATO's supreme Allied commander Europe, General Dwight D. Eisenhower would later write in his memoirs, "The lesson of Haswell's Phantom ships was clear. Sometimes the most effective way to defeat an enemy is not to destroy their capacity to fight, but to undermine their confidence in their ability to do so effectively." First Officer Elizabeth Montague, who had tracked U-boats in the Admiralty's submarine tracking room, went on to a distinguished career in the intelligence services after the war. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, she was part of the team that advocated for psychological operations based on the lessons learned from Project Chimera. "What Haswell showed us was that perception is reality in combat," she wrote in a classified memorandum. "If we can control what the enemy perceives, we control the reality in which they must make decisions." Commander William Perry, who had led that first experimental convoy, remained in the Royal Navy until 1960, retiring as a vice admiral. At the dedication of a memorial to merchant marine losses in Liverpool in 1957, he spoke about the turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic. "We tend to think of the war at sea in terms of tons of shipping sunk or U-boats destroyed," he told the audience. "But equally important were the ships that were never attacked, because we found ways to confuse and disorient the enemy. Every merchant vessel that reached port safely because a U-boat commander couldn't get a proper targeting solution represented not just cargo delivered, but lives saved." The statistical impact of Haswell's innovation was staggering. Before the implementation of Project Chimera, Allied shipping losses in the North Atlantic averaged 650,000 tons per month. By late 1943, with the system widely deployed, losses had dropped to under 150,000 tons monthly despite an increase in shipping volume. In human terms, this represented thousands of sailors' lives saved. The merchant marine had suffered catastrophic casualties early in the war, with a death rate higher than almost any branch of the armed services. By war's end, over 30,000 merchant seamen had lost their lives. Without innovations like Haswell's, that number would have been significantly higher. Today, standing on the windswept deck of HMS Belfast, now preserved as a museum ship on the Thames in London, it's difficult to imagine the terror of those North Atlantic convoys. The ship's gray steel bulkheads give no hint of the phantasmal light show that once made it seem to shift and distort to watching enemies. The few remaining mountings for Haswell's projectors are easily overlooked among the more conventional weaponry. Yet in their time, they represented a weapon as powerful as any gun or depth charge, a weapon that targeted not ships or submarines, but the minds of the men who operated them. In the final analysis, Geoffrey Haswell's insane idea proved to be anything but. It demonstrated that in warfare, innovation often comes not from doing the same things better, but from approaching problems in entirely new ways. By understanding that perception could be weaponized, Haswell helped change the course of the longest continuous military campaign of World War II. As Admiral Sir Max Horton, Commander-in-Chief of Western Approaches Command, wrote in his final wartime report, "The victory in the Atlantic was won not just by courage and persistence, though these were present in abundance, but by intelligence and imagination. When conventional methods proved insufficient, we found unconventional solutions. In that respect, few contributions were more significant than Haswell's invisible fleet." And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.